Hello, everyone. I'm Robert Wenzel. Welcome to the 10th edition of Sunday Morning with Robert Wenzel. Today's topic is laughing at the Laffer curve, the Trump tax reform con. Well, the Trump administration is out with their tax reform plan, or the framework for it. It's a very, very skeleton plan that it's out at this point, and that should be worrisome in itself. When you've got a guy that's president that is a street hustler, it's not the things that he tells you that you want to be concerned about. It's the things he doesn't want to tell you about. Now, what's going on now is horrific enough, but the rest of the details are going to be really a mess. But let's just take a look at where things stand now. We know, for example, that the tax cuts are going to be greater than the revenue that's generated from other tax increases. There's going to be some tax cuts, there's going to be some tax increases, but with the tax cuts being greater than the tax increases, that's going to increase the deficit. The Trump administration is telling you not to worry about this because, quote unquote, the cut in taxes will increase growth in the economy, and therefore the government will make up for the deficit by gaining greater revenue from the growth in the economy. So we're going to take a look at that sort of theme right now in terms of the specifics of the Trump proposal that we know right now. Basically, when they say that the growth is going to make up for the deficit, that growth will increase taxes and therefore the deficit shouldn't be a concern, what they're talking about is a supply side economics kind of perspective on the economy. And they're basically looking at two things under the supply side umbrella. They're talking about the Laffer curve, and they're talking about trickle-down economics. So let's take a look at those two in the framework of the Trump tax policy. So the first thing we'll look at is the Laffer curve. Although they don't really say the Laffer curve, and they don't really say trickle-down economics, and they don't really even say supply-side economics. They're just saying it will pay for itself because growth is going to be greater, and therefore it will increase revenues, and the deficit won't be a problem. So let's take a look at the Laffer curve. The Laffer curve was a concept invented by an economist by the name of Arthur Laffer. He actually first drew it on a napkin. And what we have here on the x-axis is tax rates. And what we have here is, on the y-axis, is tax revenues. So his contention was that as you increase the tax rate, at some point you're going to hit something, it's going to fall off, and the government revenues are going to be lower. So it's sort of having this intuitive understanding to it. It's not completely off, but this is not any kind of scientific analysis of what happens at every tax bracket, and that should be understood at every tax rate. We do know, for example, if the government taxes 0%, they will get zero in tax revenue. That's sort of pretty much understood. And then also on the other end, if we get 0% tax here, and then we get 100% here, if we're at 100%, the government's going to get zero in taxes because no one's going to work if they're not going to get paid for it. So intuitively, there's something here, but there's nothing specific about what bracket, what happens at what brackets, and there's nothing at all that suggests that the curve is this smooth. For example, just pulling some numbers out of a hat here. Let's say that there's a guy that is taxed, a family man that is taxed at 40%, and he earns $250,000 a year. And his wife works part-time to supplement that, and she earns $25,000 a year. Now, the tax rate drops from 40% to 30%. So they decide, hey, the wife isn't going to work anymore. She's going to stay home full-time to watch the kids, to homeschool them, and all that sort of thing, because he's got that extra revenue coming in. So that's really a good, when you cut taxes and families make decisions like that they have more income, and one of the family members is going to leave the workforce, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But that's not going to raise tax revenues. Remember, you're cutting from 40% to 30%, and you've got a person dropping out of the labor force, so she's not going to be taxed, which is a good thing, but it's not going to increase tax revenues. Let's take another example. I take Uber a lot, and a lot of the Uber people are doing that as their second job. So some of these people are already working 16 hours a day. So you could, if you cut their tax rate from say 30% to 20%, it's a good thing for them. There's more money in their pocket, but that doesn't mean that they're going to suddenly increase the amount of work they're doing. They're sort of worked out if they've got two jobs. So basically, that's some revenue that's gone also. Again, not a bad thing when taxes are dropped, but that's another case where the government revenues are dropping when tax rates brackets are dropping. So the idea that we are right now at the point where if you lower taxes, it's going to be more tax revenue, that's not certain at all. The assumption is somehow made, and again, there's no basis for actually thinking it's this smooth. It could change at different levels, how much people work and how much don't. But in addition to that, there's nothing there. There's somehow the idea is made that we're somewhere here on the curve, so that if we start cutting rates, it's going to start increasing revenue. There is absolutely no justification to make that contention at all right now. The Laffer curve is just a basic, simple thing. It's a joke to take it seriously, to think, you're at the point where this is going to happen. Now that's problem one with the justification for deficit spending with regard to the personal income tax. Let's look at it even further. There are some studies out now that say, and again, we don't have the full framework. They haven't put it all out, and that's a problem. Like I said, Trump's a street hustler, and what he's not telling you is what you should be really concerned about. So we don't know everything, but at this point, it appears that as many as 30% of the people, the individuals, are actually going to be paying a higher tax rate. And it appears that, from what we know now, that the actual tax rate on average for everyone is going to be somewhere between $5, which David Stockman estimated, and $30, which is what the Tax Policy Center estimated. So we have no one is going to change their work schedule. The economy is not going to suddenly boom. People are not going to suddenly work twice as hard for an additional $5 a year or $30 a year. It's ridiculous. It's really questionable, even if it was much higher, $200 a year. How is that going to change anything? People are not going to change their work habits for that. It's nonsense. And 30% of people are going to get a tax increase. It's very, very, very slick stuff. On the personal side, there's really not much going on as far as tax cuts overall. So there is absolutely no idea to even think about the Laffer curve. First of all, you can't do it. And secondly, when you're talking about $5 a year or $30 a year tax cuts, that's nonsense. It's nothing. It's nothing on you. It's a waste of time. Now, on the other end, on the corporate tax cut side, there actually is going to be significant tax cuts for corporations. They will probably amount in total to about $2 trillion. Again, they're going to play around, so it will be whoever is close to power that will get tax benefits, and those that are away will probably get taxed more. So there's going to be a lot of shuffling and all that kind of stuff. But basically what's going to happen, it's estimated at this point that there's going to be, over the next 10 years, $2 trillion in net tax cuts to corporations. Now, there's nothing wrong with tax cuts, okay? If you just had a tax cut and that's all you had to look at, this would be great. $2 trillion means corporations are either going to be able to pay more dividends to their shareholders, are going to have much more money to invest. If they invest it in capital goods, what that means is the country's going to become more productive. The more capital goods, the more productive every employee is going to be. So there is something a little bit to the supply side contention that this trickle down if you cut taxes, okay? Because what's going to happen is, let's say it all goes into capital investments. That means there's going to be all kinds of new capital equipment, which is going to make each worker more productive. So there is something to say for that, if that's the only part of the story. But it's not, because the Trump administration is not shrinking the size of government. This is the size of government. It's not going to change. So that means if there's a $2 trillion tax cut over 10 years, what's going to happen is the government is going to have to drain that money from somewhere and to support the debt, to finance the deficit. So what we've got here, let's take a look at it. It's just on a 1 year basis, because what they're going to charge is that, well, over time the growth is going to overcome the deficit. But let's just take a look at year one. Okay, so say year one we got 200 billion in tax savings. Okay, so we'll say this is the amount of savings that's in the economy. Okay, so this is going to add, and we're going to just assume here to sort of make it a simple understanding here, simple model. So it's going to add 200 billion to the savings market. Okay, so that's great, and that's what they're looking at. They're saying this is going to be great. It's going to create all kind of growth. But if you don't cut the size of government by 200 billion, if you don't take 200 billion out of the economy, out of the government, cut the government down by that size, the government's going to have to get this money somewhere because it's not coming from the taxes anymore. So they're going to have to go to this market and drain 200 billion. So it's a bogus wash. Individual corporations and companies may benefit or lose based upon where they are, where all the new tax rules are written. But for the economy overall, there's no gain. It's nonsense to think that this is somehow going to grow the economy. You're putting it in here and then you're draining it out here. Now, there's different ways you can drain it out. You can directly borrow. The government could directly borrow the money, and then you would be crowding out the private sector from any financing they're doing out of here. That would be $200 billion less of financing available to them. Or you could have the Fed monetize it, buy this, and that would cause the government to be able to compete with the corporations on the goods they're bidding for. But whatever the way, what you're doing is you're getting 200 billion in for 1 year, and the government's draining out 200 billion. So it's a wash. It's a joke. The whole supply side thing does not work. As long as you don't cut government spending, there is no trickle-down effect. The Laffer curve thing, when you're talking about such small amounts, based on the policy framework we have now, makes no sense. And that's where things stand. And then we have the problem of Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Trump's National Economic Advisor Gary Cohn writing a program that does not appear to have a chance to make it through Congress without being cut up, changed 100 different ways. Total mess. Nothing good here for the economy. The way to really get the economy going is to shrink government, shrink the bureaucracy, let more money flow into corporations, let more money flow into individuals. And the way you do that is you don't change anything with the current structure of taxes. You just cut the rates. Cut the rates for these people. Then you don't have lobbyists trying to pull stuff here and there and trying to finagle stuff for their firms and screw other firms and all that. Just cut taxes from here and make an equal or greater amount of cut in government spending. Unless that happens, it's all a joke. It's all a scam. It's government expanding. It's government eventually turning everything into a mess. Have a good weekend. I'll see you next week, Sunday.